Okay. And we'll admit people as they come, but I took 2 minutes just with housekeeping so that we can start our meeting in a pretty timely way. Once again, welcome, good afternoon, and Shavua Tov. Uh, a new week, and very soon to be a new Jewish month, the month of Adar. And there's a saying in Hebrew, Misha nichnas Adar marbim b'simcha, which means when the month of Adar arrives, happiness increases. Some of that is because Adar is the month in which Purim is observed. I think that instead of being a declarative statement, this statement that we've offered today is a hope and a prayer. We pray that Adar will allow the Jewish people once again to feel a sense of simcha at what is surely the most difficult and sorrowful period in Jewish history in the lifetimes of most of us on this call. So nevertheless, through our brokenness, we have found renewed strength. And through our sorrow, we have found renewed solidarity. And I think the meaning of this mission is that we might be able to share our strength and share our solidarity with people who need it most, our family, um, the Jewish people, and the Jewish people in Israel. So we're really going to express that they are not alone. We're also hoping to learn with and from a number of communities that have also experienced not just the brokenness since and on October 7th, but also have found incredible ways of providing help, relief, and healing to their society. We hope to do some hands-on work that allows us to give back. And we hope to learn a lot both from the people on the street, as it were, and also leaders in various fields of people who are political leaders, people who are Jewish leaders in the Jewish religious sphere, especially in our own movement, our reform movement partners and friends, people who are working in peace and reconciliation, people who are working in military addressing the strategy the conflict from a military perspective. So we're hoping to give a really good overview of the conflict, where Israel is today, and what we can bring back to our community is a lot of knowledge that can't be obtained just by watching the news here in the States. So that's sort of the why of this mission. And I'm going to invite my partner, Cantor Kleinman, to share more about the what and the how. And then we'll make sure that most of this conversation is about responding to what's on your mind.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Blake. And I just want to reiterate that it's really nice to be together with all of you, and really hope that we'll have an opportunity to travel with many of you next month as well. We've been working on planning our trip with a trip provider that's called J Squared. If any of you have traveled on previous temple trips to Israel, you are probably familiar with a trip provider called either Artsa World or DOT, which was the Reform Movement's Israel trip provider. During the pandemic, Artsa World, DOT folded, and a number of the most wonderful people who worked there actually started their own trip agency. They're not really a travel agency. I don't know exactly what the right way to refer to them would be, but and our new trip provider is called J Squared. They plan a lot of the trips for liberal and progressive congregations in the reform and conservative movements. And so Temple Emmanuel of the city of New York recently planned a trip also with J Squared. Park Avenue Synagogue. I don't know if their trip already happened or is coming up soon. They also worked with J Squared, but this is really sort of the premier trip provider for congregations like ours.
I put a simple link in the chat window so that you can, on your own time, explore their website and learn more about the organization and what their values are and what their strategy is in engaging travelers.
right? And they're the ones who are really connected to, again, all of the premier educators in this space too, who would be joining us, to provide the educational content and the guiding for the trip. So our itinerary was designed through J Squared. As Rabbi Blake stated, there were really three goals that went into designing the itinerary. The first was learning, and particularly learning in a way that we can't do in the same regard from here, from the States, learning that we really feel best equipped to do in Israel. So learning, supporting, or showing solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Israel, through, in particular, connecting with our sister communities in Israel, which you'll see reflected as part of the itinerary, and in connecting with Kibbutz Be'eri, which you'll see is a substantial part of our itinerary too, because that's a kibbutz that our WRT community has a special personal connection to through our former executive director, Yoel Magid, who was the manager, sort of like the mayor of that kibbutz for a number of years. And it's a kibbutz that will be the focus of some of our fundraising efforts as a congregation later this spring at our gala. And so it was important to us to show solidarity in that way. And finally, the third goal is helping and volunteering through doing hands-on work where we can. I'll share the itinerary in just a moment, but I did want to say a word about the volunteer opportunities. We have some wonderful volunteer opportunities that are planned as part of our trip, and we are continuing to explore other possible volunteer opportunities as well. We have heard the feedback from a few who are either interested in registering or already have registered for the trip, that they would love to see some additional volunteering, hands-on volunteering opportunities as part of the trip. And we wanted to let everybody know that we are exploring those opportunities, while at the same time being very selective around the volunteer opportunities that we do engage in conversation with our trip providers and with the people we are connected to who are on the ground in Israel. And that is because there are some volunteer opportunities that we are understanding are starting to become a burden on those who are making the volunteer opportunities available, particularly when the groups who are visiting are in Israel for days rather than for weeks or months. And so we're working really hard to make sure that the volunteer opportunities that we are incorporating into our itinerary are things that are actually needed and helpful, and not things that are going to be creating any sort of additional burden. And so we feel confident that the opportunities that we have on our itinerary so far fit those criteria, and we have some leads for and are looking into some additional opportunities as well. But I just wanted to make sure that we're being responsive to that feedback that we're hearing, and to let you know that that is something that we are working on at this point. So I'd love to share my screen with the itinerary unless there are any other questions about what I've said so far. No?
I'll
Okay.
just chime in that, we're also learning from congregants and members of the community. And I have some friends and colleagues who've already done missions similar to ours in recent weeks. And they're coming back with ideas and are able to convey what succeeded, what did not succeed. So we had a congregant at services on Friday night who said he just returned from a large-scale relief mission, but he teamed up with a guy through the organization Zaka, which is basically physical assistance, life-saving relief. And this volunteer organizer is taking groups to prepare like cookout dinners for soldiers. And he said it was a really fun and meaningful way of engaging. So I do promise you we're pursuing leads like this, but as Cantor said, we want to create volunteer opportunities that not only make us feel good, but that actually in demonstrable ways do good, and that don't force organizations to work harder than they already are to help the people most in need. So we want to be doing volunteer work that provides a maximum of direct benefit to the recipients of the aid.
And I'll add to what Rabbi Blake said as well, that You may have looked through the trip itineraries for other organizations or other congregations, and we should expect that our itinerary may look different from the itinerary of a group that's visiting now or a group that visited a month ago, because the trip providers are continuing to evaluate the experiences of the groups who are going on these trips, and they're continuing to evaluate the feedback from the organizations with whom the congregations have interfaced as part of their trips, to continue to make sure that the experience that each congregation has is the most relevant experience for that time period, which is why, again, you may see our itinerary looks a little different from the itinerary of a group that traveled last month. So we will all be responsible for getting to Israel on our own. There's not a group flight. So everybody will book their own travel. And the first group activity will be on Monday evening, will be a dinner that just helps to sort of orient us to the trip and to help us connect on the ground in Israel. We'll be staying for the duration of our time in Tel Aviv, which we've been advised by our trip provider is really the easiest place for us to be able to take all of the different trips that we're going to be taking over the course of our few days in Israel. On Tuesday, and again, like Rabbi Blake said, our itinerary is subject to change, both so that we can make sure that it's as meaningful as it possibly can be, and then in response to any security concerns as well. We'll spend part of the day on Tuesday with students from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the Reform Movement Seminary that where both Rabbi Blake and I were ordained. Many of the students from HUC chose to come back to the States after October 7th, and a number of them actually decided to stay in Israel. And so we have a deep and very long-standing relationship with HUC-JIR, and we really pride ourselves in our congregation's long history of helping to nurture the development of those students and to support them throughout their time in school. And so we would really love to spend time with some of the students who have chosen to stay in Israel to show them the support of our community at WRT. And by the way, Rabbi Blake, please chime in as we go on the itinerary with any of the organizations or people with whom you have deep relationships and connections. Also on Tuesday, we'll have an important opportunity to volunteer at the Tel Aviv Expo, which is a civilian relief center that is run by Brothers and Sisters in Arms. This is an opportunity. This is one that you will see probably in the majority of the itineraries that you would look at from other congregations and organizations. This is a helpful and needed volunteer opportunity for us. We'll learn exactly about the nature of what we'll exactly be doing, most likely when we get there, right? Because they're not going to know exactly what they need from us until we arrive. We'll spend some time as well that day with families of some of the hostages to hear their stories and to learn about what it is that they're doing to help ensure the return of their loved ones. And I know that will be a powerful opportunity for us. We had an opportunity to meet with families of some of the hostages here at WRT a few weeks ago. They cannot all travel, and so this is a powerful way for us to be able to go and to show solidarity with those who are in Israel. We will also that day have an opportunity to meet with a representative of the Israel Religious Action Center, which is the Israeli reform movements. Would you say, Rabbi Blake, their social justice arm that helps to ensure religious equality in Israel, along with advocacy for a number of other causes. And so they have a new executive director, Orly Erez-Lechovsky, who will actually be visiting WRT toward the end of March. So this will be part of an extended opportunity to connect with the IRAC, the Israeli Religious Action Center. Orly won't be in Israel at that time, and so we'll be meeting with Anna Kislansky, who is the CEO of the Israeli Movement for Progressive Judaism, which is the Reform Movement's Israeli arm. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, I mean these are really our partners in leading the reform movement in Israel. So Orly, whom I hope you do get to meet when she comes to WRT in March, is the successor to Anat Hoffman. And I'm looking around the room, and I know a number of you know who Anat Hoffman is because she has been a regular visitor to WRT and one of the most inspired social justice champions and legal advocates for the disenfranchised, especially including those who are not part of the religious bloc of Haredi, which has been given disproportionate power and influence over Israeli governmental affairs since the founding of the state. So that's very much the work of the IRAC, is to represent the disenfranchised, both Jewish and not Jewish, including Arab Israelis. 1 in 5 Israeli citizens, passport-holding Israelis, is not a Jewish person. And Anna Kislansky is really very much the director who sits in the seat equivalent to Rabbi Rick Jacobs' seat here in the States, in that she oversees the movement that organizes all of the non-Orthodox or Reform synagogues and institutions in Israel. So really important people for understanding the picture of how Reform Jewish values are made real in the Jewish state, where reform is sometimes a dirty word.
Um, we'll be staying overnight, as I mentioned before, in Tel Aviv. And the following day, on Wednesday, we'll have a really extraordinary opportunity to spend time with Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is a member of Knesset for the Labor Party and is I'm correct in saying, first and only reform rabbi in Israel to be represented in the Knesset. He'll spend a little bit of time with us that day. And then, as I talked about previously, we're gonna, we hope, again, you see here pending confirmation, we hope we'll have an opportunity to spend some time visiting Kibbutz Be'eri, which is one of the communities in Israel that was most heavily affected by the attacks on October 7th. This is a community that our community has a deep and personal connection with, and a community whose rebuilding efforts we hope we can be a significant part of supporting. And so we would really value the opportunity for a group of representatives from our community to go and to visit the kibbutz, and to then be able to come back to our WRT community here and really help to mobilize and encourage our community in building support for contributing towards the rebuilding of Be'eri. And so we see this as a really important ambassadorial role that the participants on the trip can play in helping to support our efforts back here. We are then going to spend some time with the Bedouin community in Israel and talk about the place of Israeli Bedouins in the Israel-Hamas war. And finally, and Rabbi Blake, I think, can talk a little bit more about this, because it was at his recommendation that we're going to visit the Marcus Blood Bank, which is the new blood bank for Magen David Adom. Again, this is has been another very important aspect of the itineraries of a number of institutions and organizations. And I don't know if Rabbi Blake, you want to say another word about that piece.
Just briefly on both of these bullet points. First of all, some of you have traveled to Israel, perhaps with your kids when they were young, and did a quote unquote Bedouin experience, and it was about being served tea and food in a tent. And that is not really real Bedouin life in Israel today. the real Bedouins of Israel are not really nomadic in the sense that they live in usually, on or below the poverty line, in peripheral communities. So we might think of them as slums or shanty towns, but they have their own community life, and they are part of Israel's very significant Arab minority. So they are part of a tribal Arab Muslim collective with a unique identity and also a unique and somewhat conflicted relationship with the Jewish state, both as loyal citizens of the state, but also at odds with Israel. And to learn from their perspective what war has been like on them and for them, I think will be really illuminating. And then the Marcus Blood Bank is brand new. It literally just opened before the war, and became a Israel's primary center for life-saving efforts in both in terms of Magen David Adom, which is of course Israel's first name in first aid and ambulatory services, but also runs the centralized national blood bank, which is desperately in need of being resupplied at all times, and also a fresh breast milk bank, which is really incredible. Really, it's a one-of-a-kind cutting-edge institute that is actually allowing women to donate fresh breast milk for women who cannot lactate and need to feed their newborns. So I got to visit it in July before the center had even opened. And I think it will really be an important part of the experience to understand how Israel is mobilizing life-saving services.
Thank you. And then the following day, which is actually our last day in Israel, we will spend a big chunk of the day helping to harvest vegetables. Some of the farms in the southern part of Israel, because those areas have been evacuated, don't have workers to harvest their crops. And so they're looking for volunteers to help with that. This is, again, a piece of the itinerary that you've probably seen on a number of other itineraries. And again, a piece where it's very important to us to make sure that we are really working in a way that's truly helpful. And so, we put together this opportunity in partnership with our trip providers in a way that we think will be helpful to the farms, which have started to report that the training of their volunteers has become time consuming for them. And so, they want us to be thoughtful around, how we're approaching the volunteerism there. We are going to actually be doing the volunteering together with members of Kihilat Yozma, which is an Israeli progressive or reform community in Modi'in, which is between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, which has been one of our sister communities for decades at this point. This is a community with which we have a very long-standing and close relationship. It's Rabbi Nir Barkin actually has already been to WRT to sit and to visit with Rabbi Blake since October 7th. We also conducted a Zoom with Rabbi Barkin fairly soon after the attacks on October 7th. And so both for us and for them, the chance to connect as a community is very meaningful, and it's very special for us to be able to show support and solidarity for this community that have been such close friends of ours for such a long period of time. And part of what we are looking to do here as well is we'd like to reach out to Kihilat Yozma as well as others we are connected with in Israel to ask whether there's anything that they think is needed that we may be able to pack in our own suitcases as part of our travel. And that's another way that we want to make sure that we're offering all of the help and support that we're capable of offering. We will then, through a special connection that Rabbi Blake has, have a chance to meet with Stephanie Hallett, who's the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Do you want to say a little bit more about Stephanie?
No, she had been the chargé d'affaires under the immediate previous ambassador to Israel from the U.S., Tom Nides, and is now working closely with the new ambassador or ambassador designate Jack Lew. So she's brilliant, really interesting, and has been involved in Israeli diplomacy since well before October 7th. So when I was visiting the embassy this summer, she spoke with our delegation mostly about the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which of course was growing in closeness and collaboration in the hope that they might sign on to the Abraham Accords, which are now several years old, but which will continue to be strengthened, or at least that was the idea before October 7th. And I think that there's still interest there. She was also very conversant in the internal strife within Israel, both in the population and in the government over the challenges to the judiciary and to democracy. So she's going to be a really interesting person to talk to.
I want to add one other piece to the itinerary that you can't see here because it has not been added yet, but some of you might have been present last weekend when Rabbi Cantor, Shani Ben Or, and Boaz Dorot came to visit our congregation for Shabbat Shirah. Shani is the first Rabbi Cantor to be ordained in Israel, the first Cantor, the first Reform Cantor to be ordained in Israel. And she has a songwriting partner named Boaz Dorot, and they are the Nigunim ensemble, and they spent some really special time with us last Shabbat, and at the end said we would really like to have an opportunity to spend some time with your group in Israel too. That would mean a lot to us, and so we're looking for opportunities to spend some time with them as well, which I know will be very beautiful. So that's sort of just an overview of the trip and of our itinerary. And I'll just add one other piece, which is that when Shani was visiting last week, one of the things that she said is that it truly is deeply meaningful for Israelis to see Americans who have made the decision to travel to Israel during this time to show solidarity, to help support the Israeli economy, and to educate and inform themselves so that they can then return to the States and be the advocates and the ambassadors for Israel that the country, so desperately needs at this time. And so, that's really a large part of the purpose and the goal of the trip that we'll be taking together. So why don't we pause here and just take, any questions, either questions or feedback, by the way. If there's something you were hoping to see on the itinerary that you didn't, we would love to hear that because the itinerary is still in progress. Or if you have questions either about what we'll be doing or about the logistics, we'd be happy to take those now too.
The day volunteering to do the agricultural work, where is that? Or is that still to be determined?
Still to be determined. Well, yeah, we're not sure which farm it's going to be yet.
But it'll be a bus ride from Tel Aviv.
I have a question. Is there any way we can coordinate flights so that it isn't so disparate for till dinner time on a day, and cross your fingers everyone got there? Sorry.
I think once we've finished registration, we can certainly share contact information for all of the trip participants for anybody who wants to coordinate together. That things won't be so disparate because I assume, there are a few airlines other than El Al that are flying to Israel right now, but El Al is still primarily the airline providing flights to Israel at this time. So there won't be too many different flights that people will be on. Anyone else?
Is the trip, is it going to be solely people from Westchester Reform, or are there going to be others involved?
At this time, the trip is only open to WRT members, although my mother may be joining us, but other than that, the trip is at this time only open to members of WRT.
And their mothers.
And yes, and they're exactly right.
Hi, it's Wendy. First of all, thank you both so much for taking the time to walk through the itinerary. As you know, I'm actually really excited and my mom wants to come too. So I guess my question is going to be in regards to, additional volunteer opportunities. Will we have the flexibility if some of us, decide, what that might be too challenging from a physical standpoint or emotionally? How are we going to handle that?
Yeah. Do you mean if we have so if we do have additional volunteer opportunities, we will make sure that we're communicating those as they come up. We won't surprise people on the trip with a lot of itinerary items that you hadn't been expecting. So that will allow people additional time to plan around that. And yes, there is flexibility. If there are certain activities that we're participating in that for whatever reason are not a good fit for anyone from your group, then that's no one is required to participate in any of those activities. And like we talked about, we will be in Tel Aviv, which is a central place. It's not like I know on some other trips we're traveling all over and you're sort of stuck somewhere, and that won't be the case on our trip.
We have a question in the chat box about travel insurance. And J Squared does recommend that all registrants for their trip purchase supplemental or purchase travel insurance for the trip. They have a recommended broker whose office is in Connecticut, and I can get that information, or I'm sure they can tell it to you when you register. You can register online. You don't register through the temple. You register through j2adventures.com. But if you want to actually speak to a person, Amanda, is Nimrod available to speak to our congregants about registering for the trip? Is he the right contact, or should we just say just call the main number for J Square?
I think so
and
there's
their help desk will get you all the information you need about purchasing insurance.
I think there is a customer service number that's on our trip site. Yeah. Okay. So there's a customer care team. And if you look at the page with the itinerary here, I'll share the screen one more time to show everybody. Like right at the top, there's this purple box and it says connect with our customer care team. And then it has a phone number, and that's the best place to call during their customer service hours, to make sure that you're connected as quickly as possible to the person who's best equipped to help you.
Well, be prepared, because my research has always been with travel insurance, and the question actually came from my daughter. Acts of war aren't covered, so it'll be one of those slippery, I think it'll be like regular travel insurance from past trips anyone's done, but what do I know? So
okay, that's helpful, and they can kind of provide you with more specifics around what's covered and not.
I always purchase travel insurance for these experiences. We also are happy to pair anyone up who is traveling as a solo traveler and who would like a roommate. We're happy to do our best to try and make a match between two people who would like to have a roommate, which would both be nice for the company and also for reducing cost.
I have a question. Is WRT going to plan any future solidarity trips in spring, summer, or is this sort of a once a year?
We don't know. I mean, a lot of this just depends on the state of the war and the condition in Israel and the perceived interest/demand from within the congregation. We are working on a large-scale family and intergenerational congregational trip to Israel that Cantor and I would be leading but that is not until December of 2025. Some of you may know, we were actually scheduled to do a 70th anniversary WRT trip to Israel in December of 23. And the war, of course, precluded us from doing that. So we've decided that in order to maximize interest and gamble on the best possible time for an Israel that is not at war and actually has a more hopeful look to the future, December of 2025 is a pretty safe bet. So that's still 18 months away. Sorry, that's 22 months from now, which may be much longer than one is willing to wait. We totally get that. So we're kind of just eyeing the situation. And if it looks like there are other opportunities, I think just for clergy schedules, there would not be another opportunity before August. August would be really the next opportunity for us to pull together the strength to lead such an experience. And even then, we'll just have to assess the needs. We're also at a time where the clergy team is just unfortunately very short-staffed, and there's so many responsibilities at home that, you know, as much as Amanda and I would love to get away for longer than 4 days at a time, it's just very hard to do that because we have so many needs on the home front.
Thanks.
But we'll be happy to, you know, anyone who's interested in a summer trip who can't make the March trip, the more we hear from our congregants, the better equipped we are to actually start putting the steps into motion to sponsor future trips. Any other questions?
Do you have a minimum and maximum trip size here?
So the trip is priced for 20 participants, but we did just hear from our trip provider that they can make it work with a smaller number than that. They didn't say what they meant by a smaller number, so we need to get some more specifics around that. But we're about halfway toward that minimum at this point. And that number actually does not include most of the people who are on this Zoom today. So
somebody asked a great question about how we communicate around security. Every morning, our tour educator, who is the guide, these are very high-level professionals who provide the educational content on the trip, but also who really have not just a high IQ, they have a very high EQ, and they are wonderful at working with American tour groups and with Reformed clergy, particularly through this organization. I have found that the kind of educators that J Squared gets and their predecessor, they have the really best in class. The educator, the guide, would receive security briefings from the security ministry in the government that may affect, for instance, the highway that the bus was planning to take. They might learn of an incident or a suspicious incident, and we would take a different route. Or in the case of, as we said, Kibbutz Be'eri is on the itinerary, but if the government informs our trip that it's not safe to travel there on that day, we wouldn't be traveling there on that day. Additionally, there are other kinds of things that we don't even think about. I once had to reroute like a half a day of a trip that I was leading several years ago with the temple because of sinkholes near the Dead Sea. And we just had to go to a different beach and a different hotel. And those things are really routine. So there's a tight level of coordination. And then every morning, the clergy leaders of the trip would sit with the educator and say, okay, what's the update? You know, this would be like at 7 or 7:30 a.m. and we'd hear what the updates are. And we would make judgments accordingly. I imagine for a trip like this, though, I don't want to, you know, get out in front of my skis on this, but Cantor, you may have more experience with this. I imagine that travelers are being advised to download the emergency alert app onto their phones in Israel so that we can all receive information if, for instance, a projectile, a rocket from Gaza were to be detected by Israel's extensive missile and ballistics detection system, including Iron Dome. Israelis are notified both through air raid sirens and through an app that informs people to get to a shelter. I imagine that at this time, that's probably going to be part of the drill.
Yep.
You've done that before. Cantor actually has more experience with that because Cantor lived in Israel during a time when a different Gaza incursion prompted rocket fire, which prompted Israelis to have to know how to get to the nearest bomb shelter. That would be part of what it means to travel to Israel at this time, though I have to say, after October 7th, this war is not primarily being fought between Israel and Gaza with ballistics. It is
And,
right
you know,
now primarily an air and ground war in Gaza, not in Israel.
right. And I'll add as well, which I think is something that not all people are aware of, that all newly constructed buildings for many years at this point are required to have, you know, very easily accessible safe rooms within the building. So it's not like you would ever be in a building and have to like leave and try to run somewhere else, or be in a building that was not equipped with a shelter of some kind. And so I had seen a question about the shelter situation in the hotel. I don't know the specific shelter situation in the hotel, but I do know that this hotel was you know, would have been built within a time period that requires it to include easily accessible safe rooms and shelters.
We're going to have to end today's conversation momentarily, so maybe we have time for one more comment, but Cantor and I really do look forward to joining you on this important mission and being in touch with you throughout the coming 2 weeks of remaining registration. And we're happy to put together an email or a WhatsApp, which is going to be the app you're going to want for communicating with your loved ones back home. It's the easiest protocol for quick, better than iPhone texting. We're happy to put together a WhatsApp group that coordinates flights for those who are interested as well.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you,
everything.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Spread the word. The registration continues to increase. It's steady. It's not quick, but I think we're going to get there. So thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you
Sure.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.